Okay, hello everybody. I'm back. Today is Wednesday, April 15th. I'm putting up this video to discuss the Project Theory rubric as well as the sort of Q&A that I promised. I will be giving back feedback on the rough drafts over the next few days. I've turned in a couple things already, or like I've turned a couple back already, and I've already conferenced with some people that wanted them. Conferences aren't mandatory for this paper, so you don't have to worry about like scheduling one of those with me if you don't want to. But I'm still going to give you a little bit of feedback in a written format as well. I've been looking at the peer review feedback that people gave, and it's more or less good. Some people are having trouble accessing it, and I'm trying to troubleshoot those as they come in. But at the very least, you're always going to get feedback from me on this. So don't worry about that, or don't worry about like not having feedback. Um, the second thing I have to say is that I've further extended the due date for Unit 3 to the 24th, or yes, the 24th. Um, I did this for a number of reasons. Partly because I wanted to give everybody feedback, and it's been taking me a little bit to get that to everyone. Uh, but also because several students messaged me asking if they could get a little bit more time for this. There have, of course, been hardships associated with, you know, well, for me, teaching this course in this way, but certainly for everybody else taking this course as well, and among other courses, and then all the other stuff they have to worry about too. So the least I can do is extend the due date a little bit more. What that means, however, is that there's not a lot of time before the end of the semester that you will have to do a revision on your Unit 3 paper if that is what you want to do. I'm going to turn those papers back as fast as possible, starting when people turn them in. And if you would like to turn them in, this Friday instead of next Friday, by all means do that. Turn it in early. I'll probably get, I will say I will get to it earlier as a consequence of that. But if you do wait until the 24th to turn it in, which you're more than welcome to do, that may mean that you have less time to do your revision if you would like, because normally the syllabus specifies that you have at least 2 weeks. But 2 weeks from the 24th is our final date, and that's not when grades go out, but it is when our final, project is to be turned in. So please be aware of that. So that will mean that this week you have an assignment that you're going to do insofar as getting a sense of who your stakeholder for your Unit 4 project is. And I will explain that more on a video that I'm putting up on Friday to discuss that assignment in particular. Next week, you have to turn in your Unit 3 final draft, so on the 24th. On the 1st, you will turn in a rough draft of your speech, so a working outline, as I will be referring to it, and I'll talk a little bit more about what that is tomorrow. On the 8th, you will turn in two things. You will turn in the final written draft of your speaking outline, so that's every word that you're going to say in your speech, and you will also be turning in a video of some kind associated with that, of you performing your speech itself. So this is what the schedule looks like. I will be talking on Friday about the assignment that you'll have to do next week, early on in the week, leading into the turning in Unit 3 on the 24th, and then you will have to turn in your rough draft basically for your speech, and then your final draft, and then actually perform your speech on the 8th. I believe grades are due back to you the following week, and then yeah, that's it. So basically, I can give you, if you would like to do a revision, of your Unit 3 paper, I can more or less give you until like the 10th or the 11th in order to do that. But if I get them back on the 24th, well, I won't be able to grade all of them on the 24th, obviously, because that's when it's due. But I can give until like this amount of time, and really that should be enough. Especially if people conference with me, a lot of the time, people conference with me, and then we sort of hash out everything that's up with the paper that needs to be fixed, and then those are usually just things that can be resolved in like a day's work or like a couple hours work even. So it's really not that big of a deal, but of course we need to give that time, because some people may need it, and that's okay. But this is what the schedule looks like. This is just some logistical stuff right at the top of the video. I'm going to jump now into talking about the Project 3 rubric, because that's going to be super important. I'm going to be giving you back feedback on your rough drafts. Like I said, for some of you, you've already gotten it. I've done conferences with some of you, but this is the stuff that I'm going to be looking for in your paper. All right? So there are two categories, actually three categories that are really important here. So you need to address your stakeholder. That's the first part of this assignment. You need to address them in a meaningful way. And you also need to have some rhetorical choices and effectiveness, let's say. So you need to, for instance, avoid fallacies. You need to choose an appropriate tone. You need to choose rhetorical strategies that are really tailored to that stakeholder. Lastly, we need to use research and evidence, of course. This will be familiar. You need to integrate and cite all of your sources in a style, and so using signal phrases and so forth. We'll go back and talk about this, but really I want to see an abundance of research for this project. It may be such that it requires less than you needed for Unit 2 or Unit 1, but all the same, you need to have research and you need to put your citations in your paper. That's a big thing, because in as much as it is for like your stakeholder, you are making an argument to them, it's still a paper you're turning into, and I think you can thread the needle there with both of those senses of what this project is. And then we have organization and style and grammar and mechanics. I'll briefly talk about those at the end. But for addressing your stakeholder, so you need to identify the stakeholder in a meaningful way within the paper. I need to know who your stakeholder is. So either like the group that you're speaking to or the individual that you are talking to. If I can't readily see who you're talking to, and if it might be in there, but it's like giving me a lot of trouble, then it should be less. It should be more clear than that. Let's say. You also need to meaningfully respond to stakeholder arguments without soapboxing. So you need to not talk to a generalized audience. You need to be referring to specific quotes that your stakeholder is making in your paper. You need to find that representative voice. I noticed in Unit 2, like a lot of those projects, you didn't have, or like for many of them, there wasn't a representative quote from the stakeholder. Oftentimes it was the case that I mentioned in class, in fact, where you had quotes about the stakeholder from somebody else in that stakeholder paragraph. That's not what you want here. And so this is the opportunity to sort of revise that. You need to have arguments from that stakeholder. All right, so, and that goes along with this as well in the form of quotations. So you need some kind of quotation to go along with that. All right, and of course I understand that for some of these stakeholders that some of you may have, it might be more difficult to do this, but I was seeing it in more cases than was good, let's say. I could easily have found sources that very literally speak about the topic in relation to the stakeholder argument. So please be aware of that. All right, you'll also need to persuade the stakeholder to hold a specific position by the end of the paper. So that means not a bunch of different things that you're trying to argue at once. Don't do that. You need to do that either explicitly or implicitly through a particular level of stasis theory. So that means you don't necessarily need to state the level of stasis that you're working with here. That's fine if you do it implicitly. It's also fine if you be really straightforward with this. That's just as excellent in my opinion. All right. For fallacies, tone, and effectiveness, an excellent essay will show a choice of tone appropriate for the stakeholder and the issue at hand. You need to attempt to be free of rhetorical and logical fallacies, which we talked about with my colleague Charlie and I. We talked about some of those fallacies, like what they are, why you need to avoid them, how you sort of work through that. For further readings, of course, there's a ton of sources out on the internet about rhetorical and logical fallacies beyond just what's in the book. But I suggest, if you have access to the book, going to the specific chapter associated with that. All right, here's another thing, a personal bugbear of mine, but it's really important. You need to avoid categorical language. So this is stuff like you saying it is certain that, or using words like all or none, and other assorted words. Those are universalizing claims, to pull a page out of a philosophy class. It's categorical language. It means that it's possible for you to be wrong if somebody brings up an example of that not being the case, for instance. And so when you say that it is possible that, or it might be, or in some cases, something like that, you are being more specific about what you mean in one sense. And you're also offering your audience a set of circumstances that might be more palatable to them or understandable than making big sweeping claims about lots and lots of things when you use words like all or none and stuff like that. So you want to avoid, let's say, extreme language in that sense. All right. You also need to deploy concessions and counter-arguments that strengthen the paper's claims. There's a whole section in the book talking about concessions and counter-arguments. I talked about what those were with my colleague Charlie in our sort of audio lectures. We talked about why they were important. We talked about what they were, how to use them to a certain extent. You need to have them in your paper. You need to try and foresee what they might come back at you with in terms of the arguments that are being made. That's extremely crucial here. Going along with that, you need to also offer concessions to your stakeholder. So you need to, for instance, maybe tighten the scope of your argument, offer up some situations in which your solution might not be the most applicable, or you could talk about how certain aspects of it are important to them, and you know that, and you realize that, and you can talk about how your solution encompasses that in some way, perhaps. So you need to be able. What all of these things are doing is making it such that the audience knows that you're taking their perspective into account, let's say. That's what this is helpful with. And when you put yourself in that position, when you're able to imagine what they're going to say to you, for instance, in terms of counter arguments, it lets you tailor your argument even more to make it something that they might want to like take up, that they might agree with. So that's why concessions and counter arguments are important, because you're not trying to change somebody's entire worldview in the 5 minutes it takes them to read your paper, for instance. But maybe what you want to do is change their perspective on one aspect of a topic, and let that be the beginning of something. So that's part of like the idea of concessions. You don't need to change everything. Try to focus and limit your scope in a certain sense. All right. So with evidence and research, you'll need to integrate and cite all sources. You need primary and secondary sources in a meaningful way, not just dumped in. You need to deploy the rhetorical proofs of ethos, pathos, and logos throughout the course of the paper. And those are pretty simple to understand. We sort of talked about them like both in class and I did with my colleague. You also need to use evidence appropriate to the stakeholder. That kind of goes along with this. So with your paper, I would suggest using bits of ethos, pathos, and logos, but you're going to want to use the majority of it. You want to be tailored to your stakeholder in particular. So if they are, for instance, more receptive to logos, then you'll want to use that. But you still want to use pathos and ethos too. You don't want to limit yourself by foreclosing on the others when you sort of pick up one. And in my opinion, it's almost impossible to like only do one of these things. They all kind of just happen naturally over the course of like writing, but you can emphasize one or two over the others. So that's something to keep in mind. I'm looking for, say, an emphasis in a rhetorical proof that is appropriate to that particular stakeholder. All right, we have already talked a lot in previous projects about what these categories are, but I'll just like run through them again. For organization and style, you need to sequence your information in a way that suits your treatment of the topic, making it easier for the reader to follow. Illustrate rhetorical choices based on the audience and topic. You need to allocate appropriate attention to component parts of the essay. Please keep track of like how your text is functioning. Let's say paragraphs that aren't too big, aren't too small, a title that really sets the tone for the paper, that kind of thing. You need to demonstrate deliberate word choice for clarity. I think everybody's language is generally pretty good. You don't need to break out the thesaurus for these papers, but I am interested in you having a relatively good vocabulary on these things. Your grammar mechanics, you need to have few to no grammatical errors, be formatted in an MLA style with a bibliography or works cited. Either of those is fine. And then there are the additional considerations, so make sure that you don't plagiarize. Please follow the prompt, so make sure that it is addressing your stakeholder and asking them to do something or think something or asking something of them. That's the shortest form of the prompt, and if you don't do that, this is the problem here. Alright, you also need to meet the minimum word count, and to my mind this is the same as the previous project. Let me go back and look at that, and likewise use MLA style. But let's look up the word count again. Oop, not it. And I'll talk about the Unit 3 or Unit 4 prompt tomorrow. Project 3. 1,500 to 2,000 words in length. Alright, so you should have already turned in 750 words for your rough draft, but it should be enough time between from when you turn that in and when you are to turn this in that you can make that next half. So that's the rubric basically. I'm going to it shouldn't be published right now, but I'm going to go publish it after I'm done recording this. If there are any questions, of course, please come talk to me. But I think most of your questions are about to be answered in some way, because now I'm going to move on to recording the Q&A session, and that'll be a separate video, because I think this would be too long otherwise. So I hope that me going through this prompt was really useful to you. Again, scroll back to the beginning of the video to look at the logistical stuff that I've discussed. The paper, Unit 3 paper, is due next Friday, in other words. So I will talk to you in a bit, and good luck on your Unit 3 papers.